Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching. We help sales managers and leaders make more money, save time, and become kick-ass leaders of their sales teams. And that's what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We are here to give you the tools and tactics to build a well-oiled sales machine and teach you the mental toughness skills so you can show up confident, focused, emotionally in control, and ready to energize your team. It's time to talk sales leadership and mental toughness. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome everyone to today's podcast. It is Matt Phillips. Excited to be with you today. I have a guest that I get to introduce you to that I've been wanting to have on the podcast for quite some time now. And we originally met, probably about 9-10 months ago at this point. And I've had the opportunity to work with him and the leadership team and just get to know him and talk everything leadership and mindset. And we've been kind of lining up our schedules to try to get this booked. And we finally pulled it off. And I'm so excited today to introduce you to Doug Bishop. Doug is the CEO of Marsh McLennan Agency, both the Bouchard regions and Florida regions. He's in charge of the entire state of Florida, to simplify that. But he has a fascinating background. And Doug, just a little before I go into his background a bit more, he's the type of person that I feel like I missed an opportunity because every conversation we have, I should have recorded, because we always start talking about quotes and he's got some amazing quotes, but he's just got this mindset focused on building a great culture, building a great leadership team, getting the most out of different individuals that he comes across and works with and clients that he even interacts with. And that's why I love just discussing this. So today on this podcast, we get to dive into those topics as well. So a little more about Doug. Doug, again, CEO of Marsh McLennan Agency, Bouchard and Florida regions, but he has been instrumental in establishing MMA as the premier insurance agency in the Southeast. Find out again from a leadership and creativity perspective, I believe he's second to none. After graduating Florida State University, he began his journey with the company in 1997 as a commercial sales lines executive. And over the years, he held several key positions within the organizations, everything from workers' compensation division manager, Sarasota division manager, and vice president of sales, before becoming only the third CEO of Bouchard back in 2009. In 2023, Doug began working as the CEO of MMA's Florida region as well, and is looking forward to promoting MMA to the entire state as CEO of both regions of Florida. One thing we're going to talk about with Doug today and try to get into today, but he has a huge client-first approach, and he's had great results from that as the team has embraced it. The company has been recognized year after year as one of the best places to work by multiple regional and state publications. And he also has this passion for promoting the insurance industry as a career path for future generations. They created what's called a PIT program, a producer in training program, which has successfully educated the next generation of sales professionals for over 20 years. Personally, Doug lives in the Tampa Bay, Florida area with his wife, Kristen, and they have 19-year-old twins as well. So without further ado, let me please introduce you to Doug Bishop. Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. We've been talking about getting together and doing this for a little while, and finally our schedules aligned. So I'm glad we got a chance to do it.
This is great. And, there's so many different topics I want to dive into today with you. And again, I'm not joking when I say, every conversation of ours seems to go like deep really quick, right? And so heavily focused on getting the most out of people and creating a great culture, things like that. And you've got, a long history in the industry in different roles within the organization. So I always like to start the podcast with this, but who's one leader who has had a really powerful influence on you, and how has he or she influenced how you lead today?
Yeah, it's a tough question, really, when you have to boil it down to one. I've been fortunate to be able to work with some great leaders throughout my career. And I believe that, if you can glean a little bit from each one and kind of meld them together, hopefully it helps you to start kind of structure what you're trying to accomplish. If I had to boil it down to one, it would be probably Rick Bouchard, who was my mentor here at Bouchard when I first started out. He was our CEO. His father started the company. Then he took over and he was the CEO when I was hired back in the 90s. And he just really helped me recognize something that, first of all, he was a sales guy. He was just one of the best salespeople. People loved him, right? But because he was genuine, because he was authentic, because he was easy to talk to, easy to work with, but he was also driven. That you couldn't, it wasn't all, there wasn't a facade there. There was a reasoning for everything and the decisions that he made, but he did it with grace to the people that he worked with and around. And again, that genuine feeling. I was just always in awe of that. It stuck with me. It gave me an opportunity to go, okay, first of all, it kind of speaks to the way that I want to be a leader. So I think that just kind of drew me there to begin with. But I also saw the effectiveness of it. And so, yeah, he had a huge influence on my early leadership career, big time. And quite frankly, put me in the opportunities that I've had, put me in those positions to be able to learn and grow. So he's a great mentor and a great leader.
I think that's phenomenal, right? And, one area I really want to dive into with you today is, you're kind of coming up through the ranks, right? That, I've talked about this before, but you start out in a very entrepreneurial environment, right? Which is that agency's being built. And now obviously that Bouchard region was acquired by Marsh McLennan. And now here we are to this day, right? So this transition from entrepreneur to this corporate or part of a corporation, a larger corporation, much larger corporation, right? Yeah. If you go all the way up to the parent company. And I think it's such a fascinating thing. So I want to talk a little bit about this, and it relates to exactly what you talked about of kind of learning in that environment. But what are the biggest things you learned kind of coming from that more entrepreneurial background, I'll call it, right? Of, building a business, growing a business, scaling a business until, that acquisition date. What are kind of some of the big lessons you learned from that piece of it?
I think it started even before we became part of this larger organization, because again, been here for a little while, started in 1997. When I started, the company only had 30 colleagues total. Prior to us becoming MMA, our last year, we were up to about 250, 260. So in that period of time, growth occurs obviously tremendously. And then we've seen even more and then more structure after being part of Marsh. But if you go back to when you were in that 35, 40 employee type of organization, scale is an interesting thing. Scale is a great thing for business. Obviously, the more scale you have, the more opportunity. But when you don't have that scale, the mindset becomes incredibly important, because it really doesn't matter what your title is. You're going to play more than one role. You're just going to have to, some version. And that to me is kind of at the foundation of the entrepreneurial mindset, that you don't get caught into these lanes that just say, this is my job, this is my role, and anything that falls outside of that's not my responsibility. When you're a smaller organization, you find that, yes, you're on paper, your job says you do this, you do that, but you find yourself doing a little bit more than this and that. And you're okay with it because everybody else is doing the same thing, because we're all pulling the weight. And so it just creates this collective entrepreneurial mindset thought process. As you grow, as organizations do, we all have to have a little bit more structure, right? You can't always stay in that model as you grow. And sometimes if you don't, as a leader, recognize the fact that structure could potentially limit that entrepreneurial mindset. And I think, that's what I think happens. And I think something that as a leader, I'm constantly paying attention to. You and I've talked a lot about this, making sure that just because we're a large organization, just because we have structure that we need today, which is really meeting the needs of a lot of different areas within the business, let's not lose sight of that entrepreneurial mindset. Like, there's an end result, there's a goal that we're all trying to achieve. And yes, I have a role in that, but I also have the role to support the collective to get to that goal. And so, games you can play to kind of break that down, I guess, in your mind or with your organization is, if you have 700 colleagues, as we do here in the state of Florida now, there's teams within that of 10. There's teams that work together every single day. And are those 10 thinking entrepreneurially? Like, yes, they have a job description, but I'm sure they're probably helping someone else do a little bit of their job, their work. Why? Because collectively as a team, they have a goal that they're trying to accomplish. And so recognizing that as a leader and bringing that to the forefront, that's what, don't get hung up on this entrepreneurial mindset. And, one of the big business buzzword bingos, as you and I talk about, at the end of the day, that's really what it means. It means, are you willing to roll up your sleeves and help the people that are around you to get to the end result that we've all laid out. So yeah, we talked a lot about the entrepreneurial mindset here lately.
Yeah. And it's such a, I think, huge concept, right? Because it doesn't really matter what function you're in, I believe, at least, right? If you're in finance, accounting, HR, sales, again, that is that buzzword of why we want to be entrepreneurial, right? And there's certain beliefs about good or bad, about what that means and how it looks and how people operate. And I love how you talk about, at the end of the day, it's just, we're here to help each other, right? So whether you're, a 500,000 person company or you're a 20 person company, do we have that same mentality of like, let's come together, help each other, achieve the end goal, right? Which is that's the whole point to this thing.
Yeah. And I think that really becomes the key, is making sure you're setting goals that everybody connects with. Because if you get your team to connect with the goal, you don't have to worry about driving an entrepreneurial mindset. If each one of us individually feel like we know how we're making a difference inside of the team, of the organization, whatever the case may be, to meet the goal that we've collectively decided that that's what we're shooting for, well, then the entrepreneurial piece just kind of comes easy after that.
Yes. Well, and so I want to talk about this goal setting piece, because I think there's such a critical area that I think it's often overlooked, right? So whether you're, again, doesn't matter the size of your company or the function that you sit in, it's this goal setting process. I think, again, is just like the entrepreneurial mindset, or like what corporate means. You can attach stigmas to it or beliefs about it, right?
Yeah.
Of what you think. And so some people, when they hear goal setting, they roll their eyes. Some people, when they hear goal setting, are like, oh, let's go, like, let's roll. And I've got this process and all that sort of stuff. How do you personally, though, look at the goal setting process? How do you break it down? And just what you said, how do you then translate that to get people on board with it, actually? Because that's like one of the hardest things.
Right. Yeah, I think that is. I think the goal setting process is actually pretty simple. The goal reaching process is the hard part, right? And the goal setting is, anybody can say, this is what we want to do. I think that obviously you have to be realistic. You have to make sure that it's something that is challenging but attainable, so that you can get people to lean in and buy into it when you get to that next step, which talk about how do you get them there. It's all about communication, right? But even prior to that, recognizing what are the goals that we're trying to accomplish. Can they be broken down into bite-sized pieces for individual teams to look at and see how they fit into that picture? And then, but roll it back up and make sure that we're all focused on a common goal. There could be goals inside of that, sub goals inside of the goal, but what are we trying to accomplish as an organization? And making sure it's challenging, but making sure it's attainable. And then believing that this is those two things, right? Like lay down goals. They're not goals anymore. It's more of, this is what we got to do, show up to work and get the job done, and we'll hit our goal. That's not going to challenge anyone. That's not going to motivate anyone.
Yes.
The flip side is, if you get to where it's unattainable, well, then, it feels pie in the sky, and it's like playing the lottery. We may or may not, but, there's no excitement around it. Finding that sweet spot of where you can stay between challenging and attainable is key. And so the way that we get at that as a leadership team, we really spend a lot of time challenging each other in those two pockets, in those two categories. Is this challenging us enough as a team? Is this attainable? Are we sending the right message? And you're not going to be perfect every time. You're going to set goals that, man, we should have challenged ourselves a little bit more. Or, boy, what were we thinking? We really had pie in the sky. But that goal setting part, like I said, I think is the easier part. I think the bigger challenge for leaders is what you just alluded to, which is to then get the team behind it, and the team to buy into it, and the team to connect with it. And the way that we've had success with doing that is by making sure that we're communicating, we're very transparent. We recognize that if you don't understand the goal, you don't understand why the goal was set, what's the story behind the goal, why we're trying to achieve whatever we're trying to achieve, well, then you'll never emotionally connect with your role within that. So we have to make sure that our communication does all of that it communicates not just what the goal is, not just how we think we're going to get there, but the old Simon Sinek, right? The why piece too, the why, the how, and the what around that goal. Why do we think that we can do this? Why do we think it's important that we challenge ourselves? How are we going to get there? And here's what it looks like. And then here's what your role looks like inside of that. And it's not just one time, it's constant communication throughout the year. It's rewards off of the goal throughout the year, not at the end of the year, just one for us. This is works for us. We want to recognize as the year goes on where we are, and if we're on track or exceeding already, at least in quarterly bite size, then we celebrate that. That keeps people engaged in it. It at least makes them understand, A, there is a goal. B, I understand what the goal is. And I think I understand my role in it. If they say, I think I understand, then that's our opportunity to say, let's make sure that you really understand how you get into it. That communication piece gets you to goal reaching. The work that happens with the leadership team to set goals, there's some thought process behind that, some challenging each other as leaders, but I think that's the easier part. I think the harder part is, how do you reach goals? You got to get a team buying into the what, the how, and the why we're doing things.
I think such a critical aspect that's missed a lot is especially the why, where I think sometimes it's like, well, that's just the goal, so let's go after it. And people are like, okay, no idea how you came up with it. No idea why all of a sudden that we're going for whatever the growth is, or hopefully growth, but
sure.
And I think that's such a key point of like, they can't emotionally connect with it, right? Of like, look what we get to do. And you and I thought about this a little bit, right? Of, when we talk about motivating employees, it's understanding, with goals, it's like understanding like how they fit into the why, right? How they fit into it. And also like understanding like what motivates each person, like what is their personal why, right? Because then it's easier to connect emotionally to like, this is why we're doing it, right? So if I'm motivated by, a lot of people say money, I say, I don't want to call BS on it, but it's like but there's something greater behind that, right? And maybe it's that experience that you want or something like that, but it's like, what is that? And you keep asking. But once you discover that, then you can connect it back. Like, this is why we're setting our goals so high this year, or these goals so we can accomplish this, so you can do that.
Yeah.
Is that a big piece of like where your focus is? Like, because that seems to come really naturally to you.
Yeah. And as you talk it out loud, yes. And I don't even know that I've thought through it to those little minute details, but I think, again, if you're talking to a large organization, you're talking about goals more times than not. It's financially driven, it's objective, measurable goals, and we celebrate. And like you said, growth. We're hoping for growth, whatever that is. But I think where you're going to put yourself in a position where A, you're going to have a better chance of reaching your goal, but B, most importantly to me, is that people understand their role in the organization and how they're moving the needle in the organization, is bringing it down to what you just talked about. They're connecting with why it's important to them and important to the organization they're a part of. I think that does become critical. And it's not now about, we just have to make more money or we just have to grow. There are reasons why this is important for the organization to help your career pathing, to help continue to build the team around you and around us, to support the communities that we serve in a better way, right? However we, want to make sure that each individual connects with what they're trying to accomplish, right? Each one of us, we're all just we talk about businesses and all this kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it's just a collective group of people. And those collective group of people on an individual basis still have things that they want to achieve in their lives, personally, professionally, whatever the case may be. The more that we can align those, it doesn't have to be exact, but the more we align those, the more that we get a two-way street engagement. The organization is committed to them. They're committed to the organization. We're working in tandem to make sure that we all collectively are going to achieve whatever we're trying to achieve in front of us, goals, aspirations, whatever you want to call that.
Yes. I love that. So when you boil it down, right? So I know we're talking about goal setting, right? But getting people's whys and all those sorts of things. At the end of the day, we're talking creating a culture.
Yeah.
And then operating within that culture. How do you look at just creating a culture like you have and like you continue to, evolve the organization to? Like, how do you look at culture? What do you think about? What are you trying to drive towards and just your personal endeavors there?
Yeah. Cultures, and you and I've talked a little bit about this before. Culture is another one of the business buzzword bingos, because and to give context to everybody listening,
we were 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
yeah,
2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, with the MMA leadership team, and one thing we talked about is these statements that are general or cliche, that we kind of know what they mean, but that we really don't know what they mean. And they become the buzzwords, right? And so we were talking as a group about, when you tell people to work harder, okay, I get that. Or it's, when you ask somebody to do something, it's like, it's at the top of my list. Like, what? Or be a great leader. Don't know what that means either. And the culture, we were talking about that too, of like, it's this, let's have a great culture. What? I get it. What do you mean?
What do you mean by that? Yeah. Well, and that's what, we talked about. It's every business has a culture. It's depending on how you define it or an individual defines it. It's a good culture or a bad culture, or, just an okay culture. So, but every organization has a culture. And so it's interesting when we use the word culture, because it just kind of becomes this catch-all. I think most organizations want to say they have a good culture. And really the definition of good culture are the people that work within that organization. Do they think it's a good culture? Because if they don't, then it's not a good culture. If they do, to them and to the people, then it is. And culture becomes your magnet, right? As a business, if whatever culture you're creating, that's your magnet. Now you're going to attract talent that believes that's the culture I want to be a part of. And then you build off of that. You're exactly right. What you're talking about when we're talking about goal setting, when we're talking about connecting with the why on an individual basis to roll up to a collective, that's building your culture. And for us, that's what's important. That's kind of the forefront. The core is, hey, we're working. It's an inside out approach. We're looking internally at our collective team to make sure that we're good, that we're getting the needs met that we need, that we have the opportunities that we want, and that we enjoy each other and enjoy the work that we do collectively together. Because if we're doing all of that, then our output to our clients is going to be better than if that's not the case. And if we take care of our clients, then ultimately the big picture is they help us take care of the communities that we serve. So that, we're ultimately making a difference in call it the insurance community, call it an industry that we're working within quite a bit, like the senior living or construction industry, yes, or even just the geographical communities that we live within. If we're doing the right thing internally to help clients externally, then we're collectively making a difference in those communities. And so that's kind of the beginning, right? And so we have someone new to the organization. If they don't feel that, if they don't recognize that's important, that they're where they connect into that, probably not going to like our culture.
Right.
So that to them, we would have a bad culture, right? Because that's not the culture they're looking for. But that's our culture, and that's what we're about. And then from there, you work off of these things such as engagement. Like I said, this two-way street. If it's no different than almost like a social contract, right? Like if I come here as a new colleague and I know that this is what this organization is all about, well, now I've made a commitment to be a part of that. And the organization has made a commitment to make sure that I am a part of that, and that two-way street happens. And then that's what the definition of engagement becomes, because if that gets out of whack one way or the other, the organization doesn't think that the colleague is doing their part, or the colleague thinks that the organization is taking advantage of the work that they do, whatever that is, that gets out of whack, well, then engagement suffers. Mm-hmm. But when you keep those, in alignment, another fun word we talked a lot about, but when you keep those at the same level, well, then you're going to create a better engagement with people that came to work to be a part of a team that believe in a culture that the collective team believes in. That's it. That's culture, right? That's just it in a nutshell. And there's books written about culture, and there's so much discussions about culture. And don't get me wrong, I think it's important that an organization continues to focus on, because culture is also a moving target. You can't just write it down and say, well, that's who we're going to be for the next 50 years. The reality is culture, because it's tied into individuals, every time a new person comes to the team, the culture slightly shifts, changes. Mm-hmm. It can shift for the better, it can shift for the worse. And that's the responsibility of the leaders to make sure you're paying attention to those things.
So let's talk about this a little bit. And for you listeners, like you've heard me talk on other podcasts about leadership philosophy, right? And what you believe and who you are and how you want to show up and the things you want to do and the culture you're creating, right? That's part of the leadership philosophy. And you can hear Doug's come through pretty darn clearly, right? So he spent a lot of time studying this and refining it and going through it. And I want to talk about maybe some ways that you did that in the past, but immediately upon that, Doug, I think you make a good point. When someone comes, when someone leaves, the culture is going to shift slightly, right? And that can sometimes lead to challenging conversations that need to happen, perhaps, or moments for coaching, or however you want to describe it. An important, message that needs to be delivered, all these sorts of things. how do you, or how have you handled those in the past when you know you need to have those, and how do you coach your team to handle those types of situations? Because they're coming up all the time. I mean, I just got off a call with a client of mine talking about two, salespeople fighting over an account. And that's the same thing. If it goes back to what's the culture, first of all, that we're trying to create, and then what do the facts tell us so we can have the best decision for the client, right? But talk to me a little about that.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is ever evolving. Your culture is it moves. And I think the first thing you have to do is you have to find the foundational pieces of it that don't move, right? Like that this is just non-negotiables. This is who we are, and make sure that that's well defined, and make sure that people that are becoming part of the organization understand that part of it. Outside of that, though, I think as a leadership team, you have to be a little fluid with, again, non-negotiables never get negotiated, but the means of how we get there over time can change. Generationally, we've seen this change. Well, guys like me that's been here for a while, foundationally, who we've been hasn't changed. But a big potential trap of a leader is to try to create it the exact same way that it used to be, right? Well, we used to. When you start saying we used to too many times as a leader, it's about time for you to take a step back and go, what should we be doing, not what we used to do. I think every business leader out there probably lived this just fairly recently with all of the things that came through the pandemic. And, there's a lot of businesses that talk about, boy, our culture used to be this, and then pandemic hit, and the way that we operate and the way that we interact and all these things changed. And are we going to get back to where we were? And, I've always been a firm believer that if you're a leader that's always looking in the rearview mirror of where we came, you're going to run into something. And so make sure you're paying attention to the fact that, yes, that learn from where we were. Again, foundationally have those non-negotiables. This is who we always are.
Yes.
But you're going to have to pivot from time to time when you see the trends and it doesn't mean you're losing your culture. It just means you're changing and shifting the culture to continue to get to the end result that you want, those non-negotiables, without beating yourself into the ground of saying, let's go back to the way that we used to be. I know that's a kind of a long answer to a short question you had there, but for us as an organization, I think that's something that we can fall into that trap, and we challenge ourselves on a regular basis that, like, who are we as an organization? Here's the culture that we're trying to accomplish. Are we there? Are we driving that? And if we aren't, is it okay because we're still getting to we're not stepping outside of the non-negotiables? And this is just a shift in how we continue to define our culture, or is this a problem where we're moving away from who we really want to be, and we need to self-correct? And so going back to when you have the situation where you have people that go back to the social contract, as I call it, right? Someone who came on board and said, this is who we are. And again, I'll use the pandemic as a prime example. There are a lot of colleagues that prior to the pandemic, some of our best mentors, really helping out next generation, engaged in development, and not defined, but just through osmosis, being around people, helping them with their jobs, whatever the case may be. But the pandemic, we had some folks that said, the way that we're working at home, this is pretty good for me. This is a nice new structure, right? This works for me. Okay, that's great, but it doesn't 100% work for us, because what's important to us, what's part of our culture, is that we want to create the next generation of insurance professionals. In order to do that, we can't just put it on paper and have just a handful of trainers do that. It takes a village, which means the sales folks, the service folks, other leaders. Your role in helping be a version of a mentor or helping, it was critical before, it's going to be critical more. So you can't do that if you're going to be at home 5 days a week, as an example. So we're not asking you to come back in the office 5 days a week either. So let's find the compromise. Let's find a hybrid model. Let's get you, in a model that works for you in the new social world that you're living in, because all of our world's changed, but you're still going to meet the needs that the organization has by playing a role of mentor and helping out. Those two things being balanced changed a little bit of who we are as a culture, but didn't change the non-negotiables of being connected and being part of an organization. And it still goes back to where we started with this, is that if you don't recognize that and talk to a colleague about it, they start to lose their why in what we're trying to accomplish as a team. And then it just becomes about numbers, and nobody gets excited about numbers.
For all you sales managers and leaders out there, I wonder if you've ever thought the phrase, why in the world did I sign up for this? I know I have. And the reality is that leading a team of salespeople can be challenging, right? Just figuring out how to motivate each person and keep the pipeline full and just dealing with the pressure of delivering the month after month results that your company's requiring. And call me an optimist, but amidst the challenge, amidst sometimes the frustration, we have this opportunity in front of us to really impart our knowledge, right? And to leave that legacy on our team and just achieve next level results. And that's why today I want to personally invite you to our free masterclass training, where I'm going to share the exact secrets, the exact framework that I teach sales leaders around North America to help just take you to next level results for you and your team. And it's actually the exact framework that I taught one of my clients who over a 12-month period tripled organic revenue growth and increased margin by 30%. So I want to invite you to that masterclass. You can click the link below or head over to mattphillipscoaching.com/webinar. And can't wait to see you in the training.
I used to, Doug, get excited about numbers. Back in my modern accounting days now.
Yeah. Actually, I should say my CFO gets really excited about numbers.
Yes.
And the rest of us like the story. We like numbers, but we like the story behind the numbers, not just the numbers. Right?
So true. So true. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. People connect with story. And then you look at every children's book, every novel you pick up, it's because of the story that you can emotionally connect with. And that's why you put some books down, because you're like, I'm not emotionally connected with this book. That's why you can't put another book down, because you have that emotional connection with the story. Right. And that's such a critical piece to like telling the story, man. This is how it fits in. This is how it makes a difference. This is how what you do matters, like why it matters and how we need to do this. And I love that focus on like it's almost like the target is the same, but the way we get to the target could shift, morph, change, but we're still focused on that. So the how or the delivery of it, like that's going to change, right? I could do a mentor call via Zoom now. I could also do one in person. I could also do it over lunch. I could also do it over phone. I mean, as long as we're achieving the end goal. And I think some people lost sight of that. I lost sight at certain points too, right? Especially during the pandemic when you're home and then back and then home and back. And am I at a client or am I not at a client? And all those sorts of things of we fell in love with the environment that we were in and we lost sight a little bit of the end goal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, we're fighting an interesting battle in businesses because this is societal. This is not just about any one organization. I just think as a society, we're kind of moving more to a siloed world, right? Like you can stay in with a device in your hand and feel like you're connected. And the reality is you're not really connected to anything. And other than just that device, right? And the things that are coming out of that device. But it does play a little bit of games in our head that we think that we're more connected than we are. I do know that one theme that I've read in just about every business book throughout my career is that silos are not a good thing. Right? Working in a silo is not a good thing. Living in a silo is not a good thing. I think it's the reason we have seen more of an increase in some mental health issues. And yes, the pandemic played a part of that, but it's also just this siloed world that we're starting to get in. And you've heard me talk about this before. I've always believed that we collectively are always going to be stronger than I would ever be. And I think most people get that, right? Like if we can work together as a team, work on a common goal, common cause, whatever the case may be, business, professionally, whatever it is, personally, we're going to be better. But yet we have a lot of things going on around us within our worlds, personally and professionally, that are driving us to not be connected, connected, but not really connected, almost false connection. And so I think as leaders, we have the responsibility to recognize when it fits and works well, and recognize when it is necessary that we be not just false connected, but real connected. As I use that analogy probably way too far.
No, you're right. And, I had a breakfast this morning with a friend of mine who our kids play hockey together. I've gotten to know him this past year, and I could have easily taken that over the phone. And yet we both chose, like, let's meet up for breakfast and share a meal over it. And it's just a different experience. And I'm not saying you have to be in person every time. That's not what I'm saying by any means, but it's understanding that balance of when I need to be in person and when I don't. And just understanding that and knowing that and playing with it a little bit. I think being okay playing with it.
Yeah. And it goes both ways, right? Like if you went to breakfast every single day with a friend, that would probably be overkill as well. And it might not be the most efficient way for you to start every one of your days. And so it's the balance of the two. And I do believe that, we haven't had this freedom, this flexibility as a workforce really ever to this degree. And there's still a lot of figuring it out. It's not like this is 20 and 30 years ago. Just 3 or 4 years ago, there were people that got up every morning at a certain time and drove into a certain place and did a certain job and then went home and then did it all over again the next day and the next day and the next day. And, there's some comfort in that because you don't have to think. You have to just do, right?
Yes.
We're now in a world where all of us have to kind of think, like, is this a good use of my time? Is this the best way for us to handle this? And so this is a new world. This is a new challenge for all workers, and just about, in a lot of industries. Yes. But it's also a new challenge for leaders to recognize that this is a new need. This is a new opportunity for us to coach, to develop people, to think about what makes sense and how they operate, how they work to ultimately get the job done. That's something we didn't have to think about just 5 years ago, right? It wasn't that long ago where you had managers going, well, we might have a problem with Doug because he hadn't come in office in 2 days, right?
Right.
Right? I mean, I wonder where Doug is right now. That was management. Doug's not here. I don't know if he's doing in this whole new world that we live in now, where we're giving Doug an opportunity to make decisions on what works best for him while maintaining what we need as an organization from time to time. It's the balance of the two that's brand new to all of us.
Oh, you reminded me of, back in the day, I was working with a big company, and we were putting together the disaster recovery plan. And the topic of conversation putting that together was, what if something happens and everyone has to work from home? And to your point, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, 11, 12 years ago, right? That was the conversation of like, what do we do? Like, how can we run where are the server farms at? And how are people going to have laptops? How do they, I can't remember the terms, but like, go from their laptop and channel into the servers here. And it was like, where now it's like normal and different decisions are having to be made. I think that's such a great way to phrase it. You and I talk a lot about time. Like I believe as a leader, you have to intentionally carve out time to think, to use your word, to think and to contemplate some of these things and to grow as a leader and develop as a leader. It taught me a little about, like, again, you've had this evolution, you've been in the industry a long time, all that sort of stuff. And you've spent time kind of mastering the leadership. I know you continue to do that. Talk to me a little about like how you've done that in the past, how you continue to kind of grow, develop, and carve out that time for yourself. Because you're a busy guy. You got in 2 regions you're in charge of now, right? But how does Doug Bishop find the time?
I'm still figuring that out. No. You've got to be selfish to some extent. I think first and foremost, it is, a cliche that everybody uses, but it's the one resource, right, that we can't create more of. That's your time is your time. And for me, I find that I break it down, and I know you and I talked about this years ago. I went through some training that kind of taught me into this focus time, free time, and buffer time is the term. And that buffer time, or that time where you're not on, you're not having to do what, that focus time is what 80% of your time should be spent focused on the things that you do best, better than most. And that's that's the role you have, the job you have, the responsibilities that you have. Free time is just that. I don't want to think about work. I need downtime. I need to, be with my family. I need to, for me, be in the woods, doing, wherever, whatever it is, but it's not about work. But that in between time becomes the critical part. And it's the carving out time where you're not having to be on, for whatever term that means to everybody, but having to be focused, right? And it's also not completely disconnected from business and from the work that has to be done. It's that preparation. Covey used to always break it down in the 7 habits, the 4 quadrants, right? And it's that quadrant that always gets pushed to the back because it's the things that you need to do in order to be effective, but it's not critical. Carving out time to make sure you stay inside of that has been critical for me. The best way I do that is my buffer time, or my time of doing that, is my Friday afternoons. My Friday afternoons, the folks that are responsible for scheduling things for me, they do not schedule things for me on Fridays, mostly Friday afternoons. Mm-hmm. And Friday afternoons, I mean, it has to be house on fire, client and colleague issue in order to kind of pull me away from that, because that's the time that I'm going to sit down. I'm going to look at the week that was and the week that's going to be, and it allows me to think about it. Now, it's a habit, and just like everything else, habits have good things and bad things about it. Sometimes you got to challenge yourself because you're just kind of going through the motions of getting it done, but at least the habit's there, and recognizing that you're having to protect your time. You're having to you have to be, like I said, selfish. You have to be selfish with that block of time, for me at least, because without that, I'm kind of blending it throughout the week, and I just don't ever get anything. You got to have, in order to have good highs, you got to have good lows. And if you don't have big lows, you can't have big highs. I can't do that blended piece. So, but it's important. You're right. We talk a lot about time. And I do think, especially at what I see with a lot of our younger leaders is, and I can say this about younger Doug Bishop when I was a leader, you just try to balance it all at the same time. You just, do it on the fly, do it on the go. Like I'll handle, I can be sitting here focused on doing a project or a long-term strategy or something that's going to help me into the future, and be ready. The phone rings right now to also jump on something that's going on. I'll just balance it all. And the reality is you can't, and you fool yourself into believing you can, but you can't. You're going to do one of those not at 100%, and both of them require 100%. So focusing on that time.
Yeah. That's me too as well. Right. It's like we take pride in work. Mm-hmm. And at least what I find is when now I don't believe this anymore, but if I took time to just think and relax and think about leadership and all that sort of stuff while at work, it's like my mindset was like, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. I should be doing more. And there was this guilt attached to it almost.
Yeah.
And I think the quicker I don't know, do you find I've heard one of my clients said, thought this was interesting, and maybe a good way to describe this was it's hard to attach value to that time because it's squishy. Like I can't point to a spreadsheet, or I can't point to a project plan, or I can't point to a phone call or meeting on my calendar or something like that.
Yeah.
I like that description, but I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I do. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that when you get results from it, though, it starts to help, right? But you're right. Like sitting down and planning for 2024, the first quarter, whatever, the next month, whatever it is, but taking time out, stepping back and going, okay. And I'm a visual person. I want to actually visualize my calendar as an example. When am I traveling? When am I not traveling? And what times do I need to make sure that I'm protecting what I'm not protecting? That alone takes time. Like I've literally taken time to figure out how to create time, right? That's a kind of a weird thing. And you want to talk about really starting to question yourself. Am I taking time out to figure out where my time's going to be? Right. I mean, have I lost my mind? Until you get into that month, right? Or that year or that quarter or that week or whatever it was that you were planning for.
Yes.
And it works. And then you're like, boy, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't do that. Then it doesn't feel squishy anymore. Right now, it's That's like, true. Okay, there's value in that.
That is true. Yeah, I've got my gigantic calendar over here to my right. And the whole year, I spent part of Saturday night, which, I mean, we party here at the Phillips household.
That sounds like it.
Filling out my 2024 calendar on the wall, what my wife calls the eyesore. I mean, wine in hand, it was great. No, but to your point, like the visual of like, even when I look at 24, what's coming up right now, it starts to help me put together like, oh, this is how the year's going to flow. And there's lots of stuff to fill in, of course.
Yeah.
But it's that proactive mindset to like, when I look at, when I started getting into November, like I know exactly when we're going for Thanksgiving, where we're going, when I'm doing this mastermind, coming to Florida, doing all these things. now I can start putting together like a pretty cool master plan and figure out how do we lead the team and how do I set meetings with my team and do all those sorts of things. It's a huge aspect.
Yeah. I'll go back to the young Doug Bishop that didn't really necessarily may not have connected with this, the preparing or saying, I'll do it on the fly and kind of balance the two. Just you putting that calendar up, or just me spending time figuring out the next strategy that I need to find the time to work on, whatever. Just because you put it on paper and put it down and take the time to put it down, it's not like, I took the time to do that. Well, I did take the time to do that. But what I also done is I've taken it out of my head and I've put it on paper because it's going to be there regardless. If you didn't have that calendar on the wall that showed everything you're planning on doing, it'd just be rolling around in Matt's head and taking up space for you to be able to think about and do some other things. And so I fell in that trap as a young leader. I know that I didn't take the time to get things out of my head, project I needed to work on, a calendar strategy that I needed, a long-term strategy within a team, a new geographic area we're working in, whatever it is. And when you don't take the time to put that on paper or on a wall or anywhere outside of your head, it lives in your head and it takes up space. And so your focus is hard because for me, if I don't have it written down, then I'll forget it unless I remind myself in my mind about it all the time. Well, if I'm reminding myself in my mind about it all the time, well, then I'm forgetting about something else that should be in my mind, right? Because somebody told me years ago, it's sometimes just the mind trash. You got to get the mind trash out and get it on paper so that you can clear up some space and do some other things. And I just fell into that trap, I know, as a leader when I was early on, and then got into the habit of planning daily, weekly, monthly, getting things on paper, getting it there so I can come back to it. I can revert back to it. And then it allows me to get to the strategy, the projects, or the things that I need to focus on that aren't necessarily have to be done by the end of the week, but it's at least focused on moving me in a direction to getting it done sometime in the future.
Yes. Well, I think it's your point. It simplifies the process, right? Because it's really difficult to, at least for me, I was at one of my mastermind groups and I was walking around saying, I'm recording a podcast. If you had one question about leadership, what would it be? And I was literally walking around to every person in the room and capturing this for podcast topics. I'm like, what a great opportunity, right? To climb in people's heads and then answer their questions on the podcast. And even that simple thing, if I could have walked around and been like, just walked around with nothing in my hands and been like, Doug, what do you think? What's a topic you'd want to learn about? And you tell me something. And then I walk away, go on to the next person. And then I get to the end of it. I'm like, what did Doug say? And now I got to sit there and think and noodle on, instead of just like getting it out of my head and on paper where I can glance at it, which I did. And I'm like, oh, there it is right there. And it to your point, it simplifies the whole thing. Like same thing with like just stress and overwhelm, all those sorts of things. Just put it on paper or on a whiteboard. My infatuation with whiteboards, but put it down somewhere and your brain then like organizes it differently.
Yep. Absolutely.
Such a massive thing.
Yeah. And it helps you focus, go back all the way back where we started with this goal setting, right? Creating your culture, what you're trying to do with your team, trying to keep all of that literally in you're juggling all of that in your mind. Good luck. I mean, I haven't met many leaders that can do all of that. Have a purpose of how you're going to do it, get it down on paper so that you can revert back to it. It's going to make all the difference as you go through it.
So true. So true. I've got so many more questions and I know we're right at time here. So I'm going to be very respectful of your time, Doug, and make sure we end on time and all that sort of stuff. So quick question, just for people to find you, and we'll put links in the show notes, stuff like that. But just if people want to connect with you, with Marsh McLennan Agency, things like that, what's the best way?
The best way, you can find me on LinkedIn, Doug Bishop. I'm the only Doug Bishop, I think, at MMA that I checked lately. But Doug Bishop, would love to connect with my LinkedIn community. I probably should post more than I do, but I still post from time to time, and I love keeping connection with people that are. I learn more out of LinkedIn than I probably put out there, so that's not me giving back. I should probably do more. I'm recognizing that, but I'd love to connect with anybody if they'd love to do that. Yes, we're in the Florida marketplace, Marsh McLennan Agency. If there's any opportunities to work together on that, we'd always be welcome to that. And so you can find me there as well.
Awesome. And for those of you not familiar with Marsh McLennan Agency, obviously employee benefits, business insurance, their private client services as well. They can help in a variety of different ways if you and your organization are looking for a great company to help with some of that stuff. So definitely reach out. Doug, one last question, then I'll let you go, I promise.
Okay.
This one's a loaded one. I'm going to make you think on this one.
Okay.
From a leadership perspective, what's one kind of last piece of advice you would give a leader sitting in a chair thinking about how do I get the most out of my people? What's just one last bit of advice you'd give them?
One last piece. Yeah.
Not that you're going anywhere, but
no, yeah, right. No, well, way out. I've said this before to you. We've been talking. One of my favorite quotes is a Harry Truman quote when he said, "It doesn't, you can do whatever you can accomplish anything you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit." That's paraphrased, and I'm missing a word or two in there. But the gist is, make sure that you focus on the team around you and the people that you're working with. I'm always a firm believer that if we can win, then I'm going to be better off for it if we can win. And so as a leader, that's kind of been the foundation of my leadership style: being authentic, being genuine, and showing that I really do care about the success of the individuals as well as collectively the team. And I think it's important to communicate that. Communication is talked about a lot as well, but I think in our minds, everybody has seen the stats, how much people actually really hear versus how many times you have to say it for them to hear. And I'll screw up those stats, but I know it's a lot. It's always eye-opening. It's like, how many times you have to say something for somebody to hear it? And so I think as human beings, forget the leader piece for a second, we just can fall into the trap of going, I've said it before, or they know I care about them, or they know that collectively we're going to communicate, over communicate, because I don't think there's such a thing as over communicating. My wife taught me that. Right. I learned that lesson the hard way from my wife. I will say that. But I just think, that's the key, is to make sure that it's about us. It's about us collectively succeeding, and then telling them about it, celebrating the heck out of the wins. When there's challenges, pick them up, help them out. Again, it sounds like basic and cliche stuff, but it's amazing how it can impact if you are consistent with doing it over and over and over again. So that would be my one piece of advice to leaders, is just make sure that you're recognizing you're part of something. You just have a role. Your job is the leader, and you have a role. And just like everybody else has a role, and just play your role. And that role, in my opinion, is to make sure that the people that are on the team know that they're individually, someone's looking out for their best interest and moving them in the right direction. And then collectively as a team, we're winning together.
Love it. I hope everybody wrote that down. Doug, thank you so much for being with me today. I just can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. Good seeing you. Good talking to you as always.
Thanks, Doug.
See you, Matt.
Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set and help you train to master the one true differentiator: mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.